My ungrateful DIL kicked the $38,000 car I bought her and called it junk. She thought my kindness was weakness, so I returned the car and sold her house in 30 days to show her what poor really looks like. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. I stood in my backyard and watched 50 people celebrate a woman who didn't deserve the air she breathed. Champagne bubbled in crystal flutes, and the smell of expensive catering drifted through the humid afternoon air. I had spent $3,247 to throw this birthday bash for my daughter-in-law, and every cent felt like a down payment on a disaster. But I kept my face smooth. I smiled the way a woman does when she has lived 68 years and knows that a grin is often the best mask for a blade. The white tablecloths were pristine, the fresh flowers were vibrant, and the custom cake sitting on the dessert table had cost $400 alone. My son Marcus was busy playing the perfect host, greeting guests with a pride that made my heart ache because I knew it was built on sand. Somewhere inside the house, Candace was putting the finishing touches on her look, preparing for the grand entrance she believed the world owed her. Candace was 28 years old and curated her entire existence for a camera lens. She had been married to Marcus for 3 years, and in that time, I had watched the mask of the sweet, ambitious girl slip to reveal a woman who measured the value of a human soul by the brand name on a handbag. Today was supposed to be her big day, but I knew it was going to be an education for everyone involved. My best friend Lorraine walked up to me, her eyes scanning the lavish setup with a mix of awe and concern. She leaned in close, the ice clinking in her glass. "Girl, you outdid yourself," Lorraine whispered. "This is beautiful." I nodded, keeping my eyes on the crowd. "I wanted it to be special, Lorraine." "Special?" Lorraine scoffed softly. "You spent what? 23,000 on this?" $3,247. I corrected her quietly. "But who is counting?" Lorraine gave me that look. It was the same look she had been giving me for 3 years whenever Candace's name came up. It was the look that said she appreciates none of this, Gloria. You are pouring water into a shattered jar. "We will see about that," I said. "What does that mean?" Lorraine asked, her eyebrows shooting up. I didn't answer. I just kept smiling. Lorraine had known me since we were 17, back when we were pulling double shifts at the hospital to pay our way through nursing school. She knew that specific curve of my lips. It meant I had a plan, and it meant the plan was already in motion. The sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the grass. Marcus stood on the back porch and clinked a knife against his glass, the sharp sound cutting through the chatter. "Everyone, can I have your attention, please? My beautiful wife is about to come out, and my mother has a very special birthday surprise for her." The guests swarmed toward the porch, their phones already out and glowing. In Candace's world, if a moment wasn't recorded, it didn't happen. The door opened and she emerged, wearing a white dress covered in rhinestones that probably cost more than a month's rent in a decent neighborhood. She waved and soaked in the cheers like it was oxygen. I stepped forward, feeling the weight of the keys in my pocket. "Candace, sweetheart," I said, my voice carrying easily over the lawn. "Before we cut the cake, I want to say a few words." She turned to me, her camera-ready smile plastered on. I could see the gears turning in her head, the cold calculation in her eyes. She was wondering what I was about to give her, hoping it was something expensive enough to make her followers jealous. "I want you to know how much it means to have you as part of our family," I began. "You have been Marcus's wife for 3 years now, and I wanted to do something that shows how much I value you." There was a ripple of polite applause. Candace's smile widened, her eyes fixed on my hands. "So," I continued, pulling the silver keys from my pocket, "I would like you to come with me to the driveway. I led the way around the side of the house, the entire crowd following, like we were the Pied Pipers of materialism. And there it was. Parked in the driveway, with a giant red bow on top, was a brand new 2024 Toyota Camry XLE. It was silver, fully loaded with leather seats and a sunroof. I had paid $38,000 in cash for it. The guests erupted in cheers, the flashes of their cameras strobing against the car's metallic paint. Marcus beamed with the relief so thick I could almost taste it. But Candace's face fell like a stone. I watched it happen in slow motion. The smile dropped. Her eyes narrowed into slits, and her jaw clenched so hard I thought her teeth might crack. I had seen that look before, but never directed at a $38,000 gift. It was the look of a woman who felt insulted by a fortune because it wasn't a larger fortune. "Are you absolutely kidding me?" she asked. Her voice sliced through the celebration. The crowd went silent. The only sound was the wind rustling the red bow on the hood. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice remaining perfectly calm. "A Toyota?" she shrieked. She was pointing at the car like it was a pile of trash I had dumped in her lap. I deserve a Mercedes, not this piece of junk. "What, am I poor?" Gasps rippled through the guests. People were still recording, but now the mood had shifted from a celebration to a car wreck. Marcus rushed over, his face turning a deep, embarrassed red. "Baby, it's a brand new car," Marcus stammered. "It's beautiful. I don't care that it's new," she yelled, turning her rage on him. "It's a Toyota, Marcus. Do you know what my friends drive? Do you know what their mothers-in-law buy them? Mercedes, BMWs, Range Rovers. And you?" She spun on me, her face twisted with a level of greed that was almost primal. "You have all this money, Gloria. I have seen your house. I know you aren't broke. And you give me a Toyota like I'm some charity case?" Then she did something I will never forget. She lunged forward and kicked the front tire of the car, hard. "This is disrespectful," she screamed. "This is insulting. I don't want this garbage." The crowd was frozen. Some people lowered their phones, looking at their feet in shame. Others kept the cameras rolling, knowing this was the kind of drama that went viral. Marcus was shaking, pleading with her to stop, telling her she was embarrassing herself. "I am embarrassing," she mocked. "Your mother just embarrassed me in front of all my friends." I stood there and watched. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched a grown woman have a toddler's tantrum over a luxury I had worked decades to afford. Then I let that dangerous smile return to my face. "You know what, Candace?" I said quietly. "You are absolutely right." That stopped her mid-breath. She looked at me, confused. "You deserve exactly what you have earned," I continued, my voice cold and steady. "And I am going to make sure you get precisely that." I turned to the guests, who were looking at me like I was a stranger. "Thank you all for coming," I said. "The party is over. Please help yourselves to the fruit on your way out." I walked past them all. I walked past Candace, who was still fuming. I walked past Marcus, who looked like his world had just imploded. I went into my house, straight to my office, and locked the door. I sat down at my desk and picked up the phone. I had 2 calls to make that would change the course of their lives forever, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I could finally breathe. Fool. To understand why I did what I did next, you have to understand where I came from. Candace saw an older woman in a nice house and assumed I was a soft target. She forgot that my generation is only still standing because we learned how to be dangerous when pushed. My name is Gloria Jean Morrison, and I was born in 1956 in a sharecropper shack in rural Mississippi. My parents, James and Ruth, picked cotton for men who paid them in scrip that could only be spent at the company store. We lived in a house with dirt floors and walls so thin you could see the moon through the cracks at night. When I was 7, my daddy packed everything we owned into a borrowed truck and headed north. We ended up in Chicago, living in a cramped building that should have been condemned, but it wasn't Mississippi. My mama cleaned houses for wealthy families on the North Shore. She would come home with knees so swollen she could barely walk, sit me down, and tell me that education was the only way out. She told me to get my degree so I would never have to clean up after people who didn't even see me as a human being. I listened. I was the first in my family to graduate high school. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through nursing school, pulling overnight shifts in hospital cafeterias, and spending my weekends at a laundromat. I graduated as a registered nurse in 1978 and took a job at Cook County Hospital. I worked the trauma unit, a place where you see the worst of humanity and the fragility of life every single hour. That is where I met David. He was a paramedic with hands that were gentle even when he was moving at a sprint to save a life. We married in 1979. We had one son, Marcus, born in 1988. We raised him in a small house on the south side that we bought for $42,000. We weren't rich, but we were stable. David died 15 years ago of a sudden heart attack. He was only 58. He left me $400,000 in life insurance because he had always been paranoid about me being taken care of. I didn't spend that money on jewelry or vacations. I got smart. I bought a 3-flat building in Bronzeville in 2010 for $120,000. I spent $30,000 fixing it up and started collecting $2,400 a month in rent. Then I bought another and another. By 2024, my real estate portfolio was worth $2.1 million. My investment accounts held another $700,000. I had a net worth of approximately $2.8 million, but I didn't look like it. I drove a sensible Lexus, wore clothes from Macy's, and tithed to my church. My wealth was my security, my freedom, and my power. Marcus didn't know the full extent of it. I wanted him to value hard work, and for a while, he did. He got a degree and a management job, making $85,000 a year. Then he met Candace. She was working bottle service at a club, and the moment she walked into my house 5 years ago, she didn't ask how I was. She asked how much my house cost. Red flag number 1. Over dinner, she talked about nothing but Louis Vuitton and Gucci. She was a gold digger, and she thought Marcus was the gold. When they got engaged, she wanted a $40,000 wedding. Marcus came to me, drowning in student loans, asking for help. I told him then that a woman who needs an expensive wedding is telling you exactly what kind of wife she is going to be. He didn't listen. I paid the $45,000 for that wedding, the $8,000 dress, the fancy venue, everything. Candace complained the whole time that the pink wasn't the right shade. She never thanked me once. I watched her quit her job 3 months after the wedding because she decided she didn't need to work. I watched Marcus's credit card debt jump to $30,000 as he tried to fund her influencer lifestyle. I even bought them a house. A 4-bedroom colonial worth $375,000. I paid cash for it, but I kept the deed in my name. I told Marcus he could live there rent-free until he was 40, as long as he paid the taxes and maintenance. I told him to tell Candace that he had secured a mortgage. I wanted to see how she would behave if she thought the house belonged to them. She immediately spent $15,000 on an interior designer and $3,200 on a chandelier, all on Marcus's credit cards. Then came the birthday call. Marcus was crying because Candace wanted a $140,000 Mercedes G-Wagon, and he couldn't afford it. I told him I would handle the car. I bought the Toyota Camry for $36,000 cash because I wanted to give her a chance to show gratitude. Instead, she kicked it and called it junk in front of 50 people. Sitting in my office that Saturday night, the silence of the house felt heavy. My first call was to my attorney, Bernard Hayes. "Bernard, it's Gloria," I said when he answered. "Gloria, how is the party?" "The party is over," I told him. "I need you to do 2 things first thing Monday morning. That Toyota I bought? I'm returning it under the 30-day law. The person I bought it for doesn't appreciate it, and I don't give gifts to ungrateful people." Bernard paused. "And the second thing?" "The house on Elmwood Avenue," I said. "I want to sell it. I want it listed Monday morning, market rate. And I want you to draw up a 30-day notice to vacate for Marcus and Candace." "Gloria, you are evicting your own son?" Bernard asked, his voice full of shock. "I am ending a living arrangement that no longer works," I replied. "I am exercising my rights as a property owner. Get the paperwork ready. I'll be in your office at 9 a.m. My second call was to my real estate agent, Patricia. I told her the same thing. I wanted that house on the market, and I wanted it to move fast. Comparable sales were around $400,000. I told her to list it at $395,000. I wanted a quick close. "Someone forgot who they were dealing with, Patricia," I said before hanging up. I sat in the dark for a long time after that. I thought about my grandmother in Mississippi, telling me that respect isn't negotiable. If you let someone disrespect you without a consequence, you are teaching them that you have no value. Candace was about to learn that my generosity was a choice, not an obligation. Sunday morning, I woke up at 6 a.m. and made my coffee. I felt a strange sense of peace, the kind that comes right before a storm when you know you are the one who summoned the clouds. I drove to the house in Oak Park, the house I owned, but where my son and his wife slept. I let myself in with my key. The place was a disaster. Empty wine glasses, Candace's expensive heels tossed in the hallway, her rhinestone dress slumped over a chair like a shed skin. I walked to the front door and taped the legal notice to vacate right at eye level. It was professional, official, and final. Then I went to the kitchen and left a handwritten note on the table. "Marcus and Candace, the Toyota has been returned to the dealership. Since it was not appreciated, you no longer have access to it. The house is being sold. You have 30 days to find alternative housing. I suggest you use this time wisely. Gloria." I left, locking the door behind me. My phone started screaming at 10:47 a.m. I watched Candace's name flash on the screen 16 times. Marcus called 7 times. I didn't answer. I went to church, I had lunch with Lorraine, and I ignored the world. It wasn't until 2 p.m. that I finally listened to the voicemails. Candace was hysterical. "You can't do this," she screamed into the recording. "This is my house. You are a bitter old woman who can't stand to see me happy. I'm calling a lawyer." Marcus's voice was different. He sounded like a man who was watching his life burn down and realized he had been the one holding the matches. "Mom, please pick up. Candace is losing her mind." "Where are we supposed to go?" "Please, let's talk." I didn't call them back. I called Lorraine instead. "I heard you sold the car and the house," Lorraine said, laughing. "Tasha called me and told me Candace lost her whole mind at the party." "I am returning the car and selling the house," I corrected her. "You are cold-blooded, Gloria Jean," Lorraine said. "No, I am clear," I told her. "Cold is throwing them out with no warning. Clear is giving them 30 days and a life lesson. You don't bite the hand that feeds you, especially when that hand can snatch back everything it gave you." Monday was a whirlwind of signatures and bank visits. By noon, the Toyota was back at the dealership, and I had a refund check for $36,000 in my hand. By 2 p.m., the house was live on the real estate sites with a virtual tour. By Wednesday, we had 2 offers. One was for the asking price, and the other was $5,000 over. I took the higher one, a cash buyer with an 18-day close. That evening, Marcus showed up at my door. He looked like he had aged a decade in 3 days. His eyes were bloodshot, and his shirt was wrinkled. "Mom, can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside and let him into the living room. I offered him tea, but he just sat on the edge of the sofa, looking at the floor. "I don't understand why you're doing this," he said. "Candace is devastated. She's been crying for 3 days. Has she apologized?" I asked. "For what?" Marcus snapped. "For calling my $38,000 gift junk?" I said, my voice rising just enough to let him know I wasn't playing. "For kicking my car? For humiliating me in front of 50 people at a party I spent over $3,000 to throw for her?" "She was just disappointed," Marcus said, still trying to protect her. I cut him off. Stop. Stop making excuses for her. A grown woman had a tantrum because a luxury car wasn't expensive enough. That isn't disappointment, Marcus. That is greed. That is entitlement. And I will not tolerate it. "She didn't mean it," he whispered. "She meant every word," I told him. "And you stood there and said nothing. You didn't defend me. Your wife implied I was cheap in my own home, and you were more concerned about her feelings than mine. I am the woman who raised you. I am the woman who paid for your wedding and your debts. And when she spat on me, you watched." Marcus started to cry then, real, heavy sobs. "I'm sorry, Mom." "I don't want your apology," I said, leaning forward. "I want you to understand that I am done. When someone crosses a line with me, I simply remove my resources. The car was my resource. Gone. The house was my resource. Gone. My generosity is gone." "Where are we supposed to live?" he asked. "We can't afford anything. Our credit is destroyed." "Then you will figure it out," I said. "Get a smaller apartment. Live within your means. This marriage is already destroyed, Marcus. You just haven't admitted it yet." "What does that mean?" "It means she doesn't love you," I said. "She loves the lifestyle she thought you could provide. Go home. Tell her you're getting a cheap apartment and she needs to get a job. See how long she stays." He left angry, but I knew the truth. People like Candace only stay as long as the gold is easy to reach. The fallout was swifter than even I had anticipated. 4 days after Marcus left my house in a rage, he was back. He didn't come in a fury this time. He came broken. He sat at my kitchen table and told me that when he told Candace they had to move into a 1-bedroom apartment they could actually afford, she told him he needed to ask me for more money. When he told her I had said no, she told him that if he couldn't provide the life she deserved, she had married the wrong person. When I told her she needed to apologize to you, she laughed. Marcus said, his voice trembling. "She said you were a bitter old woman who was jealous of her. She said she would never work a minimum wage job like a loser." I pulled my son into my arms and let him cry. He was 36 years old, but in that moment, he was my little boy again, realizing the world wasn't what he thought it was. "You aren't failing as a husband, Marcus," I told him. "She is failing as a wife. There is a difference." On the 5th day after the party, Candace filed for divorce. She didn't even wait for the 30-day notice to expire. She had already found someone else, a man she had been messaging on social media for months. He was a small business owner, 10 years older than Marcus, someone with enough money to satisfy her hunger for a while. She moved in with him 2 weeks later, taking all the furniture she had bought on Marcus's credit cards, furniture he was still legally responsible for paying off. She posted a picture of her new life almost immediately. A new man, a new house, and finally a Mercedes. Marcus was devastated, but as the days passed, I saw a flicker of relief in his eyes. "She didn't even fight for us," he said one night. "The moment things got hard, She just left. That is who she has always been, baby, I said. You just didn't want to see it. The house sold exactly 17 days after I listed it. After the fees and closing costs, I cleared $385,000. I didn't give Marcus a single cent of that money, and to his credit, he didn't ask. Instead, I helped him find a modest one-bedroom apartment for $1,200 a month. I co-signed the lease and paid his first month's rent and security deposit as a final gift. I am not giving you money to waste, I told him. I'm giving you a foundation. What you do with it is up to you. He thanked me, and for the first time in years, he actually meant it. Over the next 2 years, I watched my son transform. He got serious about his debt. He stopped using credit cards, started living on a budget, and paid off $30,000 in 2 years. He started therapy to deal with the damage Candace had done to his self-esteem. He even got promoted at work, his salary bumping up to $95,000. Then he met Nicole. Nicole was an elementary school teacher. She was humble, kind, and she drove a 7-year-old Honda that she didn't care about. When she came to meet me, the first thing she said wasn't about the house or my car. She said, "Mrs. Morrison, thank you so much for inviting me. Marcus talks about you constantly. It's an honor to meet you." We sat in my living room and we talked for hours. She listened. She asked about my life, about David, about my work as a nurse. When she talked about her third-grade students, her face lit up with a passion that had nothing to do with brand names or Instagram followers. "That's important work," I told her. Marcus watched us from the kitchen, and I saw tears in his eyes. Later, he told me that was the first time I had smiled at anyone he was dating in 5 years. "That's because she's the first person who deserves a smile," I said. They got married a year later. It was a small ceremony in a garden that cost $3,000. Nicole wore a $400 dress from David's bridal. I didn't pay for a single thing. They paid for it themselves, and it was the most beautiful wedding I had ever seen because it was real. It wasn't a performance for the internet. It was a commitment between two people who actually valued each other. As for Candace, her new life didn't last. I heard through the grapevine that her new man wasn't as wealthy as he pretended to be. His business was failing, and he wasn't interested in funding a lifestyle for someone who didn't contribute. The relationship imploded in 4 months. One afternoon, a year into Marcus and Nicole's marriage, I heard a knock at my door. I opened it to find Candace standing on my porch. She looked rough. Her hair extensions were grown out. Her makeup was messy, and the desperation in her eyes was thick. "Mrs. Morrison, please," she said. "I need to talk to you. I made mistakes. I know that. But I still love Marcus. If you could just talk to him." I looked at her, and I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just a cold, hard clarity. "You want me to convince my son to take back the woman who disrespected me and left him the moment the money ran out?" I asked. "I was young," she sobbed. "I didn't appreciate what I had. I have nowhere to go. I'm being evicted." I leaned against the door frame. "My grandmother told me a long time ago that when you burn bridges, you shouldn't be surprised when you can't cross back over. You burned your bridge with my son, and you burned it with me. You chose materialism over love. Now you get to live with that choice." "But I have nothing," she cried. "I am done being your safety net, Candace," I said. I closed the door. I never saw her again. I heard she moved back to Indiana to live with her parents and got a retail job. She became exactly what she feared most: ordinary. It is now 2025. I am 70 years old. I sit in my backyard, the same one where the disaster began, but the air feels different now. It feels clean. Marcus and Nicole have been married for 2 years now. They live in a modest house with a mortgage they can actually afford. They are talking about having children soon, and I can't wait to be a grandmother to kids who will be raised with values that aren't sold in a boutique. I still have my rental properties. I still have my independence. People sometimes ask me if I regret being so harsh. They ask if I should have been more forgiving, more motherly. I tell them that forgiveness doesn't mean accepting disrespect. Grace doesn't mean allowing yourself to be used as an ATM. Kindness doesn't mean sacrificing your boundaries. I gave that woman every opportunity. I paid for her wedding. I housed her for free. I threw her a $3,000 party. And I bought her a $38,000 car. And she called it garbage. So I took it all back. Not because I am petty, but because you teach people how to treat you. If you accept disrespect, you are telling the world that you are worth nothing. I worked too hard and lived too long to believe that lie. Last Sunday, Marcus and Nicole came over for dinner. We sat outside and ate ribs and potato salad. We laughed until our sides ached. At one point, Nicole took my hand. "Mrs. Morrison," she said softly, "when Marcus first told me what happened with the car and the house, I thought you were harsh. But now I understand. You weren't being mean. You were being clear. You set a boundary, and you stood by it. I wish more people had that kind of strength." I smiled at her. It was the same smile I used at the party. But this time, it was warm. It was real. Marcus raised his glass. "To Mom," he said. "The woman who taught me that love doesn't mean accepting the unacceptable. We all drank to that. As the sun set, I thought about my mama scrubbing those floors and my daddy picking that cotton. I thought about David saving lives in the back of an ambulance. They taught me to know my worth. They taught me that security is built with your own two hands, and peace is something you protect at all costs. I am 70 years old. I survived poverty, I survived widowhood, and I survived a daughter-in-law who thought she could break me. I built a life out of nothing, and I am not a woman anyone should ever cross. Not because I am cruel, but because I know exactly who I am. I know exactly what I am worth, and I know exactly what I will never tolerate again." As Marcus and Nicole drove away in their modest car, waving and smiling, I felt a deep, resonant click in my soul. The cycle of entitlement was broken. My son was a man, and I was finally, truly free. But as I turned to go inside, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an unknown number, and for a split second, my heart skipped a beat. I answered it, and the voice on the other end made the hair on my arms stand up. "Gloria?" It was a woman's voice, trembling and faint. "It's Candace's mother. I know we haven't talked, but Candace is in trouble, serious trouble, and you're the only one who can help." I stood in the kitchen, the silence of the house rushing back in. I thought the story was over, but looking out at the dark backyard, I realized that some shadows are harder to chase away than others. The voice of Candace's mother, Elaine, sounded like brittle glass. I had only met her twice, both times briefly during the wedding planning, where she seemed more like a ghost than a parent, drifting in the wake of her daughter's demands. Now, she was sobbing into the receiver, telling me that Candace had been arrested back in Indiana for a series of high-end retail thefts. Apparently, the ordinary life I had imagined for her wasn't enough to satisfy the hunger for labels that I had spent 3 years witnessing. She had tried to maintain her influencer facade by walking out of boutiques with thousands of dollars in merchandise hidden under her coat. Elaine begged me for $15,000 to cover the legal retainer and bail, promising they would pay me back. I stood in my kitchen, my hand tightening around the phone, and I didn't feel a flicker of the old generosity that had cost me so much. I thought about the $38,000 car that was called garbage, and the $45,000 wedding that was never enough. The $15,000 she was asking for was almost the exact amount Candace had spent on a designer to pick out furniture Marcus was still paying for. "I cannot help you, Elaine," I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. "You have millions, Gloria," Elaine shrieked, the desperation turning into a reflection of her daughter's entitlement. "It is just money to you, but it's her life." "It was her life when she kicked my car and called my family a charity case, too," I replied. "I am not her safety net anymore." I hung up and blocked the number before the next wave of guilt could be thrown my way. I didn't tell Marcus about the call. He was finally sleeping through the night, his face losing that hollow look of a man constantly waiting for the next blow to fall. He and Nicole had just finished painting the nursery in their new home, a modest room filled with secondhand furniture they had refinished themselves. They didn't need the poison of the past seeping into their new foundation. But the world has a way of making sure you face your ghosts. A week later, a thick envelope arrived via certified mail. It wasn't from Elaine. It was from a law firm representing the creditors of the furniture store where Candace had racked up that massive debt. Because Marcus had co-signed the credit lines during their marriage, they were coming after him for $22,000 plus interest. And since I had co-signed his new lease, they were trying to attach my name to the discovery process. I sat at my desk and looked at the numbers. $22,000. It was a fraction of my net worth, but it represented every lie Candace had ever told. Marcus came over that evening, the letter in his hand shaking. The peace we had built over the last 2 years felt like it was cracking right down the middle. "Mom, I can't pay this," he whispered. "If they sue me, I'll lose my job." Nicole and we were going to start the IVF process. "Everything we saved is gone if I pay this." I looked at my son, and for a moment, I saw the 7-year-old boy in Mississippi who was afraid of the dark. But then I looked at the man he had become, the man who worked 2 years to pay off $30,000 of debt he didn't even create. I realized that this wasn't just another bill. This was the final test of the lesson I had been teaching since that birthday party. "We aren't paying them a dime of my money, Marcus," I said. "Then what do I do?" He looked defeated. "We go to the source," I said, reaching for my keys. "We find the furniture." I knew where the furniture was because Candace couldn't help but post her life for the world to see. Even with her accounts dwindling, she still had one public profile where she bragged about her new life with the businessman. I had spent an hour the night before, scrolling through her old photos, cross-referencing the background of her luxury apartment with the addresses Bernard had found during the divorce proceedings. She wasn't in Indiana anymore. She had crawled back to a suburb just 30 minutes away, living in a place that looked expensive but smelled like a desperate gamble. Marcus and I pulled up to the complex in my Lexus. He was silent, his knuckles white on his knees. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" he asked. "I have been sure for 68 years, Marcus." We walked up to the unit. I didn't knock like a guest. I pounded like a woman who was owed a debt. When the door opened, Candace stood there in a silk robe that was fraying at the edges. She looked at me, then at Marcus, and her face went from shock to a sneer in an instant. "What are you doing here?" she spat. "I told your mother I was done with you." "We aren't here for you, Candace," I said, stepping past her into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. "We are here for the $3,200 chandelier and the Italian leather sectional." "You can't just come in here," she shrieked, just like she had in my driveway. "Actually, I can," Marcus said, his voice surprisingly firm. "I have the original purchase agreements and the police report I filed when you took them without permission. And since you haven't paid a cent on the credit line, the sheriff is authorized to witness the repossession of these specific assets." I watched her eyes dart toward the living room. She had been trying to sell the furniture on the side to fund her lifestyle, but no one wanted used luxury at the prices she was asking. Two men I had hired from a professional moving company walked in behind us. "Start with the dining set," I instructed. Candace lunged at me, her fingers curled like claws. But I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, the same way my mother had stood her ground against the women who treated her like she was invisible. "Touch me, and you'll add aggravated assault to your retail theft charges in Indiana," I whispered. She stopped. The fire in her eyes went out, replaced by a hollow, pathetic fear. She watched as the movers dismantled the life she had stolen. The chandelier came down, the rug was rolled up, and the sectional was hauled out the door. "You're ruining me," she wailed, sinking onto the floor of her now empty apartment. "You ruined yourself the moment you thought a brand name was worth more than the people who loved you," I said. As we walked out, Marcus looked back once. There was no longing in his eyes, only a quiet, somber recognition. He took the keys to his car and looked at me. "Thanks, Mom," he said. "Don't thank me, Marcus." "You did the work," I said. "I just provided the light so you could see the path." The furniture was sold to a high-end consignment shop for $14,000. I added the $3,247 I had wasted on that birthday party, and Marcus dipped into the savings he had painstakingly rebuilt to cover the rest of the debt. We settled with the creditors and closed that chapter for good. The shadow of Candace was finally, legally, gone. 6 months later, the modest house Marcus and Nicole shared was filled with a different kind of noise. It wasn't the clinking of champagne glasses or the shriek of a tantrum. It was the sound of a baby's heartbeat on a monitor. Nicole was pregnant, and the joy in that house was so thick you could feel it the moment you stepped through the door. I sat on their porch one evening, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. Marcus was grilling, and Nicole was sitting next to me, her hand resting on her stomach. "We were thinking about the name," Nicole said softly. "If it's a girl, we want to name her Ruth, after your mother." I felt a lump in my throat that had nothing to do with age. My mother, who had cleaned the floors of people who didn't see her, would have a great-granddaughter named after her in a house owned by her grandson. That was the real wealth. That was the legacy. I looked at Marcus, who was laughing as he flipped a burger, and I realized he had finally learned what I had tried to tell him all those years ago. Stability isn't a $140,000 car. It's knowing that the people at your table would still be there if you were eating off paper plates. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Lorraine. "Did you see the news?" I clicked the link she sent. It was a local news clip from Indiana. Candace had been sentenced to 2 years of probation and 400 hours of community service for the retail thefts. The video showed her walking out of the courthouse in an ordinary coat, her face uncovered, no filters to hide behind. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who had gambled everything on a lie and lost. I locked the screen and set the phone down. I didn't need to see any more. The lesson was over. Today I am 70 years old, and my backyard is quiet. I spent the morning checking the books for my rental properties. My portfolio is strong, my health is good, and my mind is at peace. I still drive my sensible car, and I still wear my Macy's clothes, because I don't need a logo to tell me who I am. I look at the photograph on my mantle of David and me on our wedding day. I think about the $42,000 house we shared, and the $400,000 he left me to make sure I was safe. He would be proud of Marcus. He would be proud of the way we protected what we built. People still tell me I was too hard on Candace. They say I should have been more graceful. But I know better. Grace isn't letting someone trample your garden and then thanking them for the exercise. Grace is pulling the weeds so the flowers have room to grow. I gave my daughter-in-law everything she needed to be a part of a real family. I gave her a wedding, a home, and a brand new car. She chose to see them as insults because they didn't feed her vanity. So I took them back. I took back my resources, my time, and my energy. I taught her that I am not a charity case, and I am certainly not a fool. As I sit here in the twilight of my years, I am surrounded by the only things that truly matter. I have the respect of my son, the love of a woman who values my history, and the knowledge that the Morrison name stands for something more than a price tag. I am Gloria Jean Morrison. I came from a dirt floor in Mississippi to a life of my own making. I survived the trauma unit. I survived grief. And I survived the greed of a woman who thought I was harmless. I know my worth. I protect my peace. And I never ever let anyone treat me like I am worth less than I am. The world can keep its Mercedes and its rhinestones. I'll take the laughter in my kitchen and the sound of my son calling me Mom with a voice full of pride. That is the only luxury I have ever truly needed. I look out at the driveway, now empty of bulls and tantrums, and I smile. It's a real smile this time, one that doesn't need to hide a weapon. Everything is exactly as it should be. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here